Here's a quick little refresher on how to use Google Sheets and make graphs. Remember that if you're trying to make a graph, that one of the things you can do is select data that's not right next to each other. And I think that might be throwing a few of you off. And I'm really not picky on which graphs you make. We'll do some analysis on a few graphs tomorrow, but today creating graphs, nice simple reintroduction to how this works. So first thing you'll always want to do is to highlight the dates. So I'm just clicking, holding, dragging, selecting the dates all the way down through the 15th row, which is 429. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to select some information to compare to each other. So let's say, for instance, I want to look at the sunspot data from the solar maximum in 2014 and compare it to the solar minimum data from this year, and just looking at sunspot numbers. Notice that these two columns of data are nowhere near the date information. So what I need to do is be pretty flexible with my keypad here. So what you'll see is that I'm going to hold down the control button on my keyboard, and I'm going to hold down my trackpad. And then I'm going to click and drag all the way down to the bottom of this set of data and let up on my control button and on my trackpad. Then what I'm going to do, I'm going to get my mouse in place over the solar minimum data, and I'm again going to hold down the control button, and I'm going to push down on the trackpad, and I'm holding both down right now while I then select down and push down through all this information, and then I will let up on all that information. And by doing that, I've now selected data that is not necessarily next to each other. And I can then create a graph. So as you're making a graph, you're going to go up to this insert chart icon, or you can go to the insert menu. It doesn't matter either place. If your chart icon is not showing up, try the insert menu. If you go over and let that load, it usually takes just a little bit of time. We start with this. Now yours may not look exactly like this because these are the last kind of parameters that I used when I was setting up this graph. So as I am looking at this information, I'm just going to close my web camera at this point and shut that out of the way. Underneath the setup menu of the chart editor, one of the things that you can do is change the chart type. So right now I have the chart type I want, but you may need to then go and search if yours is not looking like a double line graph. So I'm going to choose this first line graph, which again is called a double line graph. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to scroll down to the bottom of the setup information. And if it's not already checked, you want to select use column A as labels, because if I unselect it, it doesn't look quite right. But if I then reselect it, I have a lovely double line graph that actually makes sense if I think about what I know about what it's showing me. Because in this graph, it is saying that the solar maximum data sunspot numbers got very high, upwards of 300, and then kind of progressively over this course of time in 2014 went a little bit lower. The solar minimum, right now, this year's data from middle of April until basically today's set of data, what I am seeing is that we had no sunspots, which is very typical during a solar minimum, and then starts to rise a little bit. So my setup is all good. You can do other customization, but you don't actually need to. I think it's fairly well labeled. It could be a little bit better labeled. Maybe on our y-axis it might have sunspot number, but otherwise it's pretty well done. The only thing I would recommend you do, because I do want 10 graphs in total, is to go up to this 3-dot more menu, the snowman, and then what I'd love for you to do is then to move this graph to its own sheet. Move to own sheet, and thereby you can see that that is then moved off to the side. Hiding underneath my tools right here, if I get rid of them, I can go back to my data and I can actually restart this. So then I will go back up and I'm going to hold down the control button, hold down the trackpad, select all these dates, and then maybe instead I want to do two things that are perhaps not identically right next to each other, but within the same year. So perhaps I might want to look at something like the solar minimum at KP 24-hour max. I'm going to hold down control, hold down my trackpad, select this data. And then what I'm going to do is compare that to the solar minimum 2020 data for the BZ value. Hold down control, hold down my trackpad, select this data. And then I'm going to do the same thing all over again. I'm going to go to the insert chart menu, let it create a graph for me. I remember to select use column A as labels, then move this graph over to its own sheet. Boom. 2 graphs done. You'll go back to your data, do the same thing all over again, and just choose 10 different combinations of things. I really don't mind what you choose. You never know what you're going to get and what might end up eventually being interesting information.